Hi everyone, I'm Celeste. Welcome to my BookTube channel, A Reader's Almanac with Celeste. Today I'm really excited to be talking with you about history books. You know I love history, particularly social history, women's history, and children's history. So I am going to be sharing a bunch of books that I've either already read or that I'm going to be reading in this coming year. Now I am participating in something called Historathon 2024. This is a challenge which is headed up by Vin at Revenant Reads, and he has a bunch of co-hosts. I'll post all of their information down below the video. So I'm going to split this video into 3 sections. First, I'm going to tell you about what I have already read for first quarter of Historathon, and that was devoted to prehistory through 500 AD, or CE, some people say. Then secondly, I'm going to chat with you about what I'm going to be reading next for quarter 2, and that goes from April through June, and that is for the period 500 through 1500. And then I'm really excited toward the end of the video to share with you what I'll be reading in third quarter, which is July through September, because not only do I have some really cool books to read, but I actually requested copies from a publisher, and for the very first time as a booktuber, I was sent books. So I'm so excited. I can't wait to share that with you. So I started out with some prehistory, very general prehistory, and one of the books that I checked out was Evolution, the Human Story, and that was edited by Dr. Alice Roberts. Now, Dr. Alice Roberts is an archaeologist. I believe she specializes in studying bones, and she was the editor of this beautiful DK book, and it was a really good general introduction to the subject of prehistory and paleontology and human evolution, the different phases that it went through, what we know from an archaeological standpoint about the lives of the people who lived at that time. And so it was just a really good general introduction. I also watched some archaeology specials with Dr. Alice Roberts, and that was really neat as well. I also read a book called Lady Sapiens, Breaking Stereotypes About Prehistoric Women, and this was written by Thomas Cirotteau, Jennifer Kerner, Eric Pincas, and Philippa Hurd. Philippa Hurd was actually the translator of the book, and this was fascinating. This one was right up my street. I'm going to read you the description for this book because it does it much better justice than I could just winging it on my own. 45,000 years ago, rare and precious statues of faceless women with hourglass figures, sturdy hips, and generous breasts surfaced across Europe. Spanning thousands of years and nurturing many a fantasy, they are known as the prehistoric Venus figurines. But what were the women who inspired these artifacts really like? For 150 years, researchers offered no archaeological insights into the daily lives of prehistoric women, and they underestimated their role in society. In fact, these women became imprisoned by cliches. Prehistoric men hunted, went on adventures, invented, created, and drew, whereas the role of prehistoric women was limited to educating children and carrying out domestic chores. That's all there was to say about it, or almost, but this book explores how that's not true, and through new science and new evidence, we are shown that the lives of women in that period were actually much more active in hunting. They were artists. There is evidence that in cave paintings of people's hands and so forth that these were actually done by women, not men. It shows the women as crafts people, creating and also wielding spears, because there is evidence from burials and grave goods that the women hunted as well. So I found Lady Sapiens a brilliant book, and I was fortunate enough to find a TV documentary with the authors of this book, and you sort of accompany them on digs and they show you what they're talking about. After I had read several books about evolution and the Neanderthals and the Paleolithic period, I moved on to studying ancient Rome and read a few books about that. I started out with a really, really simple book that's published by the British Museum. It's a little pamphlet called Ancient Rome, and I just thought that was a really great place to start. It went through all the basic things. You know, I love my children's history books for just acclimating yourself and putting yourself in a place and saying, okay, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I want to learn about. So this book, Ancient Rome, just gives you a little glimpse into everyday life. So it looks at the Roman villa, it looks at games children played, it looks at the foods they ate, the clothes they wore, what their political systems were like, and so on. And that was just a really brief, little interesting, good pamphlet. I then moved on to a book called A Rome of One's Own, The Forgotten Women of the Roman Empire by Emma Southon. Now, Emma Southon also wrote a very well-received book called A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. And she's a very entertaining writer. Her style is very unconventional. She's very casual. She's very pedestrian in the way she speaks. She uses slang a lot. She's irreverent. She's funny. So this may not be the author or the book for everybody who's looking to learn about this subject. And when I started to read A Rome of One's Own, I did feel a little bit off-put because, again, just as with Kindred, where I felt it started in the middle of things and presumed a prior knowledge of a subject, A Rome of One's Own started off with so much humor that I felt a little bit lost. I wanted to be grounded first in the facts of the women of the Roman Empire before I started hearing jokes about it, because I wasn't getting the jokes. So I did enjoy it, but it wasn't my favorite. I did have much more luck when I went on YouTube and I found some interviews with Emma Southon. You know, sometimes if you're not getting on with an author, I think a really great idea is to try to find a videotaped interview with them, and that way you get a sense of their personality, you get their intention a little bit more, and you get to see where they're coming from. And once I had seen Emma Southon in an interview, I liked her much better, and I sort of understood her style. In fact, she reminds me very much of one of my nieces. She's just really funny, irreverent, feminist, and she definitely knows her stuff. I also read a little book by Mary Beard called Women and Power, which was wonderful. It's a tiny little pocket-sized book that you can read in one afternoon, but it's a brilliant little essay, and I highly recommend that. And then to round out my reading, I also took 2 books out of the library, one of which I have since purchased. Those were by the author Natalie Haynes. Natalie Haynes is a writer and broadcaster. Her retelling of the Trojan War, 1,000 Ships, was published in 2019 and shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. She also wrote a book about Medusa called Stone Blind, and I picked up some of her little retellings of goddesses and Greek myths. This one here is Divine Might, and this is also sort of funny and irreverent. It's a female-centered look at Olympus and the Furies, focusing on the goddesses whose prowess, passions, jealousies, and desires rival those of their male kin. So she talks about Athena, Aphrodite, Hera, Zeus, Demeter, etc. And it's really good. I really found it engaging and accessible and light. So it was fun. She has another one which also talks about myths and women, and that is called Pandora's Jar. I had gotten that one from the library and I liked her writing style, so then I decided to purchase this one. So those were all of the books I had for quarter one of Historathon. And for quarter two of Historathon, we are to read history that took place between 500 and 1500 AD. And so I have decided that I am going to focus very specifically on one sort of period of history within those years, and that is the War of the Roses. I watched The White Queen on the Stars Network, and I absolutely loved it. It's based on books by Philippa Gregory. Some people love Philippa Gregory, some others not so much. I haven't actually read any books by Philippa Gregory in my life, but I loved this series. It is quite R-rated, so if that's something that might offend you, you might want to stay away from it. But in any event, I am focusing on the War of the Roses, and specifically, I am going to be reading 3 books. So as you probably know, the War of the Roses is about the House of York and the House of Lancaster, and the White Rose and the Red Rose, and it's a kind of a Game of Thrones. And so one of my favorite figures from that time period is Elizabeth Woodville, aka the White Queen. She would eventually marry Edward IV, and to that end I have this lovely book here, Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, A True Romance, by none other than the illustrious Amy Licence. I love Amy Licence's books, and I am so excited to read this. Yeah, so this is all about how Edward of York seized the throne in 1461, and he was kind of a playboy, and he had lots of girlfriends, and at first you will think that Elizabeth Woodville was the same, that she was no more to him, but he would end up marrying her, and it's a fascinating story, and yeah, I'm just so looking forward to this. And then in addition to that, in case you didn't know, Richard III was Edward's brother, and we all know the story of Richard III, and how he's supposed to have had a disformed spine. And was he cruel? Was he nice? Did he really kill the princes in the tower? So this next book goes into all of that. It's just a really brief guide, but I'm looking forward to it. It is Richard III, The Road to Leicester by Amy Licence. So we have another book by Amy Licence here. Recently, I had watched the movie The Lost King, and that was about the woman named Philippa Langley, who actually found the grave of Richard III under a car park. And so that is sort of her story brought to the screen, and that got me really interested in Richard. So this little guide is about that time period. I'll read you what's on the back here. Following the dramatic announcement that Richard III's body had been discovered, past controversies have been matched by fresh disputes. Why is Richard III England's most controversial king? The question of his reburial has provoked national debate and protest, taking levels of interest in the medieval king to an unprecedented level. Why did he seize the throne? Was he an evil hunchback? Did he murder the princes in the tower? Why have the location and details of his reburial sparked a parliamentary debate? This book will act both as an introduction to his life and reign and a commemoration to tie in with his reburial. So I just find that whole controversy fascinating, and I am here for it. Lastly, in my trilogy of books as a paean and tribute to the author Amy License, I am also going to read Anne Neville, Richard III's Tragic Queen by Amy License, The Real Story of the Kingmaker's Daughter. So Anne Neville was married to Richard III, and this is her story. And she is another figure in history who is sometimes depicted as evil, conniving, wicked, or was she just surviving? So I'm hoping Amy License will shed some light on her story as well. So I have 3 books on the War of the Roses: Elizabeth Woodville, Edward IV, Richard III, and Anne Neville. They're all by Amy License, and I am super, super, super excited to study this. And finally, I just wanted to share with you that I am over the moon with excitement that I have been sent my first free books by a publisher, and that is Pen and Sword Press. And I was so beside myself when I found out they were actually going to be sending me these titles. I felt like I made it. Like I got so much enjoyment out of that, more so than reaching milestones on YouTube. Ironically, like when you make 500 subscribers or you get to 1,000 subscribers, the fact that a publisher trusted me enough to send me some free copies of books to review on my channel, I just thought was amazing. So thank you, Pen and Sword Press. I've certainly bought a lot of books through Pen and Sword Press, so I feel like I have earned it a little bit. But in any event, they sent me 3 titles, which I'm going to share with you now, and then I also bought 1. So a total of 4 books. So the first one is Inside the Tudor Home, Daily Life in the 16th Century by Bethan Watts. This book looks so good. It looks at daily domestic life, and I'll just show you the table of contents here so that you can see. So, you know, how did you build a Tudor home? What were the materials used? What were the techniques used? How big were the houses? What was the flooring material? Were there fireplaces or fires in them, and where? How did you get rid of the smoke? Did they have outhouses? How did they get rid of everyday smells? What was life like as a Tudor? What kinds of medicines were used? What was the knowledge at that time? What about grooming? What was a typical Tudor house kitchen like? And what herbs could you find there? What foods did they eat? What about childbirth? What were the practices at the time? Did they have nurseries? Did the children have toys? All of these sorts of things. How did they practice funerary rites when people passed? Were there gravestones? How were they buried? Was there any preserving of the bodies? All of that sort of thing. So this tells you about how the Tudors truly lived and what life at home was like. So I'm super, super, super looking forward to this one. So that was the first one they sent me. The second one that they sent me was The Sweating Sickness Epidemic, Henry VIII's Greatest Fear by Stephen Porter. And so the sweating sickness was very swift and deadly and affected lots of people at that time. It threatened life across Tudor England, and this book is all about that and how Henry VIII had a great fear of it. So I really don't know much about it at all, but I knew that it was a huge fear that was on everybody's minds at the time. And so I'm interested in learning more about that. So this was the second book that Pen and Sword Press sent me. And then finally, I got a book that's in a little later period of history, but I'm here for this as well. And this goes along with my love of female detectives. So this is called Sister Sleuths, Female Detectives in Britain by Nell Darby. And it is what it says. I'll read a little bit of the back here for you. The 1857 divorce decree paved the way for a new career for women, that of private detective. To divorce, you needed proof of adultery, and men soon realized that women were adept at infiltrating households and befriending wives, learning secrets and finding evidence. Whereas previously women had been informal snoops within their communities, now they were getting paid for it, towing a fine line between offering a useful service and betraying members of their sex for money. So this talks about the trailblazing female detectives from the Victorian period onward. If you've ever seen the show Miss Scarlet and the Duke, that's sort of the beginning of this, and then it goes into the 20th century. And Nell Darby is a historian, writer, and has undergone training as a private investigator. She started out as a newspaper reporter. So I just have a feeling this is going to be really engaging and accessible and fun. And I'm looking forward to reading this sometime in the fall. So yeah. And then finally, I did purchase one book from Pen and Sword Press, sort of as a thank you for their having sent me 3. And the book I purchased was The 16th Century in 100 Women, also by Amy License. I know, I keep showing you books by Amy License, but what can I say? I think I'm probably just collecting all of her books, truthfully. But this is sort of little mini chapters on lots of different women from many walks of life in the 1500s. So I will be picking that one up for the next quarter of the Historathon 2024 challenge. So there you have it. Tons of history books. I'm so excited that I finally got my first books sent to me gratis from a publisher. So yay! And we're getting more into periods of history that I am more fascinated by. So I was a medieval history and literature minor at college, which has served me well in the capacity as a booktuber, certainly. Yeah, so I'm eager to learn more about the War of the Roses and the houses of Lancaster and York. And then I'll be super, super excited to get into the Tudors and, of course, you know, everything from there on in. That's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm certainly having fun reading history books this year, and I hope you'll pick a couple up as well and maybe join me in a read here or there. And we'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.